All right, we are concluding our look at Homer's magnificent epic, the Odyssey, today. And with it, we are coming to the denouement of the plot, in which the great Odysseus will not only take vengeance on the suitors for the injustice with which they have treated his entire household, from his wife Penelope to his son Telemachus, whom the suitors had plotted to murder, to the maids that they had treated with disrespect, to his entire household, which had been turned upside down by their simply outstaying their welcome. And the point that I was at pains to discuss last time and emphasize was that in being absent from the kingdom for 20 years, the main instrument of justice was also absent from Ithaca, because in the ancient Greek world, the king was also the minister of justice. And as such, in many ways, the state of disarray in which we first met Odysseus, by himself being hidden away on the island of the Calypso, in which his public repute was in some, I wouldn't say disarray, but nonetheless, his fame was not complete, and his life and its outcome were not known, and there was an element of injustice in that was felt so keenly by Athena that she first went to her father Zeus to complain to him about poor Odysseus' state, although Odysseus himself had been just in his treatment toward the gods and towards men, as Zeus himself admitted. And furthermore, it was fated that he return home. So why then is he so far from home, asked Athena, and why are we not doing anything about it? Because if nothing is done about it, then no one will anymore be giving tribute to the gods, because they do not reward just conduct. And so that's how the epic began. And so the epic, to some degree, while it is about wanderings, and many wanderings, and a man of many turns, many ways, Odysseus, a man of considerable craft, it's also about justice and about the restoration of order, order that had been breached by his long absence, but also by the god Poseidon, who had, to some degree, been seen, I think, in the narrative as a counterweight to Athena and the forces of chaos, which had plagued his kingdom. And so the question of justice is the one with which we're going to begin in our final look at the last several books of the Odyssey. And Athena is dreadfully unhappy. We've seen already Odysseus crying his eyes out on the shore of Calypso, and we've noticed Telemachus similarly distraught. We've also had chances, although I don't think I've touched on them too much in the lectures, to see the distress of Penelope in the absence of her husband Odysseus. And but the question of justice is in our minds, and one of the things that we want to see is just that, justice. But one of the great questions in this is whether the suitors deserve equal treatment from Odysseus, namely, do they deserve all to die? Because Odysseus is coming along, and if we follow him on his passage or voyage of discovery here, and he's watching who's doing what, we do see that there are certain suitors who seem to deserve a better treatment, that have not behaved quite as badly as others and probably don't deserve to die. And so at this point, then the question comes, well, then what will Odysseus do? And it becomes clear that Odysseus is not only acting on his own behest here and under his own initiative, but also at the initiative of the gods. And so in chapter 17, line 360, we come to this really interesting passage in which Athena really reveals that Odysseus, although he probably could spare some of the suitors, and they probably should on their own merits deserve a better treatment than what they're going to receive, they nonetheless will receive no mercy whatsoever, because Odysseus is now the instrument not only of his own justice, but of divine justice. They have been caught in the wrong place, it seems. So I'll read from line 360 here. After the suitors, line 358, had eaten dinner, sorry, it's a reference to Odysseus, after he had finished his dinner, and the divine singer was finished, the suitors raised their tumult along the halls. But Athena came then, and stood close by Odysseus, son of Laertes, and stirred him to go collect his bits of bread from the suitors, and so learn which of them were fair, and which unfair. But even so, she would not deliver any of them from disaster. That little line. So Odysseus goes to, in order to see if they have been fair and to judge in accordance with his standards. However, the goddess Athena is not going to be quite so merciful. And to some degree, thereby, she is also going to be unjust in her meting out of justice. And she is going to make sure that an example is made of all the suitors for what they have done here. And so this is an interesting thing. There is a sort of a moral polarization that it's clear that there are very few who are good. And it's also clear that there are a very great many who are bad, and many of the characters will incriminate themselves in the presence of Odysseus and his household. All the same, not all of them are equally wicked or equally culpable in the actions that have been committed. So we are left as the audience to some degree fearing the gods for the fact that they can strike in ways that are not only just, but also erring on the side of wrath. And so we do, to some degree, we're in a sort of an ambiguous situation as an audience in how we receive Odysseus's actions here. Do we think that he's fully justified in the slaughter of the suitors, is the question. And I'm not sure the answer is entirely satisfied, but the fact that the gods have endorsed it suggests that they are okay with the outcome here themselves as mortals. Any mortal they choose, male or female, young or old, it doesn't particularly matter. And for that reason, it seems like a godlike thing to do for the mortals to dissemble, to deceive, in order to work out their ways. And that's certainly characteristic of Odysseus, that he is a dissembler, a deceiver, and he came from a long line of it. His father likewise, but certainly I think Penelope's father was a thief. And in the process, having said that, of returning home, one of the things that he needs to learn to do in order to be a wise man is to conceal his identity even in the midst of great suffering. And this has been enjoined upon him by Athena, and he follows her lead on this and her advice. And he is aided by her furthermore in this enterprise. So Athena, he not only disguises himself, Athena aids him, and at the outset, even unseen by Telemachus, unidentified by his son, although the dogs, his dog in particular, Argos, has identified him. And the recognition that will take place is a hard-won thing, and he is waiting till the right time in order to reveal his identity. So there's a sort of a, I would say, a parallelism in the plot insofar as when we first met him, he was concealed, but not of his own accord, not of his own choice. Now he's concealed of his own choice. Before, he longed to be revealed and identified in the midst of his people of Ithaca. Now, although he is in the midst of his people, Ithaca, and he longs for that reunion, he realizes that the subterfuge and the process of disguising his identity is actually useful for his ends. And so he continues to utilize that. But in the process of getting to his ultimate prize, which is to get rid of the suitors and to do justice on them in the way that Agamemnon had not been able to do when he returned home and, remember, was murdered by Aegisthus and furthermore his wife Clytemnestra, Odysseus is going to come at it a little differently and be far more careful. But in the process of doing so, he's managed to have revealed himself a couple of times. The first instance we already dealt with, the old dog Argos, who heard her master's voice and wagged his tail, lying on the dung heap. Himself is unrecognizable. The old dog lying on the dung heap, just like Odysseus, to some degree, was unrecognizable, lying on the dung heap of life. The dog wags his tail and then dies. But there's a recognition scene there. We're going to find that there are a few more. And then there's one that seems it's parallel, and yet he is not recognized. And there's a great deal of comedy in that. That's when he finally is revealed to his wife, Penelope, and she refuses to accept that he is who he says he is. But let's go to one of the other recognition scenes, and this is a really famous one. He has revealed himself, by the way, intentionally to his son and also to Eumaeus. But there's another instance in which he's revealed, and he is revealed so inadvertently. And I believe this is line, so this is book 19, and I believe the line's around 420. So let me see if I can find this here. What do we got here? So 19. Yes. And what he has here, just to set the stage a little bit, his old nurse has come in and is tasked with treating him well, with hospitality, and that includes washing his feet. And the nurse says to him, line 380, "I say, I have never seen one as like as you are to Odysseus, both as to your feet and voice and appearance." Then resourceful Odysseus spoke in turn and answered her, "So all say, old dame, who with their eyes have looked on the two of us. They say we two are very similar, each to each, as you yourself have noticed, and tell me." So he spoke. And the old woman took up the shining basin she used for foot washing and poured in a great deal of water, the cold first, and then added the hot to it. Now Odysseus was sitting close to the fire, but suddenly to the dark side. For presently he thought in his heart that as she handled him, she might beware of his scar, and all his story might come out. She came up close and washed her lord, and at once recognized that scar, which once the boar with his white tusk had inflicted on him when he went to Parnassus to Autolycus and his children. This was his mother's noble father, who surpassed all men in thievery and the art of the oath, and the god Hermes himself had endowed him, for he had pleased him by burning the thigh bones of lambs and kids, and the god freely gave him his favor. And now he tells, and we get the story as an interlude, and quite frankly, of a suspension of the dramatic, or a heightening of the dramatic interest of the passage, because now the hard effort that Odysseus has undertaken to hide himself and prevent his identity from being revealed is about to be revealed by his old nursemaid. And there's a great deal of irony here that the woman who nursed him and brought him to life and protected him, and obviously upon whom he fed, is now the woman who will reveal him and potentially betray him to his enemies, not intentionally, but simply by virtue of recognizing him. And she has done so by virtue of his scar. Now, the scar is a legacy of a story that we're going to touch on in just a second, but note how the scar is a sign of his suffering. It's a past suffering, and it's left a mark on him. And Odysseus's scars are the things that in some ways most strongly identify his personality. It's not the fact that he has great power or great ability as much as that is. It's Odysseus's long suffering that is particularly distinctive and connected up with his virtue. But when he was a young man, Autolycus was wounded, and he was given the name Odysseus, that is, 409, distasteful. Then when he grows up and comes to the great house of his mother's line in Parnassus, where there are possessions that are called mine, I will give him freely of these to make him happy and send him back to you. This was why Odysseus came, so that he would give him glorious presents. That's how he came into the presence of Autolycus. And when he comes there, of course, um, the story ensues, and Odysseus goes on a hunt. And while on a hunt, he's a young man still at this point. He goes on a hunt up into the forest, and he comes across a wild boar. Now, a wild boar, let me say something very briefly about this. When we think of boars, obviously we think of piece of pigs, and obviously wild. But what we don't get is a sense of the simply the terrorist and terrible threat that a boar actually poses, because wild boars range in size from something between 500 and 900 pounds. In other words, it's an enormous beast. And not only is it enormous and fearsome, because it has these saber sharp tusks that reach out, it will charge out at people because it has a bad temper, and it will gore them and spear them and cause great damage. So a boar is a prey that is of not only a threat to its prey, but also to the hunter. And it's very quickly the case that the hunter can become the hunted. And that's the case here, because while they are hunting this wild boar, young Odysseus with his long spear has been isolated, and the boar turns on him and runs at Odysseus. And Odysseus, the boar is a little bit too quick for him. And the boar drove over the knee 450, and with his tusk gashed much of the flesh sideways and did not reach the bone of the man. Now Odysseus stabbed at him and hit him in the right shoulder, and straight on through him past the point of the shining spearhead. He screamed and dropped in the dust, and the life spirit flittered from him. And then, of course, the young Autolycus and the others come to his aid, and they treat him for this. And he says, and his father and mother and queenly mother were glad in his homecoming, 463, and asked about all that had happened and how he came by his wound. And he told well his story, how in the hunt the boar with his white tusk had wounded him as he wound up to Parnassus with the sons of Autolycus. The old woman, now note how this has given a pause, a dramatic pause. We're just told that she recognizes the scar and she's about to blurt out, and then we're told this long interlude of how he came to have this small feature on his body, no doubt concealed by his cloak, that we have not even heard about yet at this point in the story, but it suddenly becomes of all importance, and the digression adds to the suspense of the story. So we pick it up there, and the old woman holding him in the palm of her hands recognized this scar as she handled it. She let his foot go so that his leg, which was in the basin, fell free, and the bronze echoed. The basin tipped over on one side, and the water spilled out on the floor. Pain and joy seized her at once, and both eyes filled with tears, and the springing voice was held within her. She took the beard of Odysseus in her hands and spoke to him. Then, dear child, you are really Odysseus. I did not know you before, not until I had touched my lord all over. She spoke and turned her eyes towards Penelope, wishing to indicate to her beloved husband's presence. But Penelope was not able to look that way or perceive him, since Athena turned aside her perception. So again, Odysseus is there, but he's not on his own. The goddess of wisdom is there, shielding the gaze of his wife now from her husband, so that he is not betrayed and revealed before his time. And he grabs her by the throat and says, "Nurse, why are you trying to kill me? You yourself suckled me at your own breast, and now at last, after suffering much, I have come in the 20th year back to my own country. But now that you have learned who I am, and the god put it into your mind, hush, let nobody else in the palace know of it. For so I tell you straight out, and it will be a thing accomplished if you do. And by my hands the god beats down the arrogant suitors. Nurse of mine though you are, I will not spare you when I kill the rest of the serving maids in my palace." Now, this is hardly a pleasant, nice to see you, old nurse, and I'm glad that you are pleased to see me. It's with a murderous threat. Now, of course, I think it doesn't make us exactly sympathetic to Odysseus, but it does give us something of the sense of how great the danger is to him at this point, that he should have to threaten her in this fashion. So there are 2 pages of detail of how he acquired this scar, and this heightens, as I say, the suspense, but also the sense of his identity in the moment and the pressure that has built over the whole course of the story leading up to this point is revealed in Eurycleia, his nursemaid's recognition. Now, Eric Auerbach, in his work on mimesis, talks about this very passage of Odysseus's scar. And he says that in every event, whether human or supernatural, when details are needed, they are explained as they are in a Greek epic like this. They're explained in full, however great a digression they are. Through imagery, through the expressions of characters, the structure of the story, it's apparent that that this is of importance, and there are moral absolutes being revealed here. Now, these come out here. And what Auerbach's point, and it's one that I'm not going to tarry on too long here, is that we don't find this in biblical narrative. Biblical narrative would never have gone on the extended digression about a single little scar and the extended history of how he got it like this. Even though it's dramatically useful, it's not to the purpose of biblical narrative simply to tell stories and to weave stories. There's a better and higher purpose that is there. As artful as this is and as wonderful as it is, it's not characteristic of biblical narrative. I'm talking about biblical narrative in one of my other classes right now, which is why it's in the forefront of my mind. But anyway, so he is almost revealed here. And if that is done, then justice will not be done. He will not avenge himself on the suitors. But of course, he does manage to get out of the scene, and Eurycleia does express her dismay that he even had to threaten her. She would never reveal him. She makes it clear to him. And at this point, we have another intervention by the gods in the form of a dream. Now, the dream, which is rather different here, is a dream of geese, and the dream comes to Penelope this time. Remember Penelope, who's just been distracted by Athena, speaks and gives a dream. And the dream is going to give rise to the means by which Odysseus can exact his vengeance on the suitors and reveal who he is. And it's going to be revealed in action. So what is the dream? Line 560. Because, let's see here. No, hold on, 536. She says, listen to this dream of mine and interpret it for me. One's reminded of a little bit of Joseph, the dream teller before Pharaoh. I have 20 geese here about the house, and they feed on grains of wheat from the water trough. I love to watch them. But a great eagle with crooked beak came down from the mountain and broke the necks of them all and killed them. So the whole 20 lay dead about the house, but he soared high in the bright air. Then I began to weep. That was in my dream, and cried out aloud, and around me gathered the fair-haired Achaean women as I cried out, soaring for my geese killed by the eagle. But he came back again and perched on the jut of the gabled roof. He now had a human voice and spoke aloud to me. Do not fear, O daughter of far-famed Icarius. This is no dream, but a blessing, real as day. You will see it done. The geese are the suitors, and I, the eagle, have been a bird of portent. But now I am your own husband. Come home, and I shall inflict shameless destruction on all the suitors. So he spoke. And then the honey-sweet sleep released me, and I looked about and saw the geese in my palace, feeding on their grains of wheat from the water trough, just as they had been. Then resourceful Odysseus spoke in turn and answered her. Now, this is a funny old thing. She not only provides the dream, she provides the interpretation within the dream, and it's still wondering, what does the dream mean? It's a very odd thing, it seems. But note that in some sense, remember when Pharaoh was expressing his dream, or no, hold on, it was now I'm conflating it with Daniel, in which Nebuchadnezzar said, tell me what the dream was and the meaning of the dream. And Daniel has to actually know what the dream was in addition to that. But here, she has revealed not only the dream, but the interpretation of the dream, and yet nonetheless seems not to know what the dream means, because of course the interpretation seems as dreamlike as the dream itself. But resourceful Odysseus spoke in turn and answered her. Lady, it is impossible to read this dream and avoid it by turning another way. Since Odysseus himself has told you its meaning, how it will end, the suitor's doom is evident. For one and all, not one will avoid his death and destruction. Circumspect Penelope said to him in answer, my friend, dreams are things hard to interpret, hopeless to puzzle out, and people find that not all of them end in anything. And here's the passage which I find fascinating. There are two gates through which the insubstantial dreams issue. One pair of gates is made of horn, and one of ivory. Those of the dreams which issue through the gate of sawn ivory, these are deceptive dreams. Their message is never accomplished, but those that come into the open through the gates of the polished horn accomplish the truth for any mortal who sees them. I do not think that this strange dream that I had came to me through this gate. Now, just word to the reader here, this mention of the gates through which dreams passed, we will find again in the Aeneid towards the end of book 6. After Aeneas comes up through the underworld, he will go through one of two gates, one being of horn and one being of ivory, and the similar intent to both gates. And but Penelope says, I do not think this strange dream that I had came through this gate. My son and I would be glad if it did so, and put it away in your heart this other thing that I tell you. This dawn will be a day of evil name, which will take away from the house of Odysseus. For now I will set up a contest. And what's the contest there to do? It's to decide who's going to marry her. Those axes, which in this palace he used to set up in order so that 12 in all, they stood in a row like timbers to hold a ship. Now, if you've seen the old axe and the axe handles and how the metal head sticks in it through a round notch in the or hole in the wood, and the metal is forged in the anvil, so it's so hot that it actually fills in it and then sticks in it. But there, at the moment, we just have the axe handles with the hole in it. And he says, he, that is Odysseus, would stand far off and send a shaft through them. Now I will set up these as a contest before my suitors. And the one who takes the bow in his hands, strings it with the greatest ease, and sends an arrow clean through all the 12 axes, shall be the one I will go away with, forsaking this house where I was a bride. A lovely place and full of good living. I think that even in my dreams, I shall never forget it. We'll pick it up with that encounter of Odysseus and the axe handles and how Odysseus responds to that briefly, and I will put it on another video, but let's leave it off with that and with the suspense of that scene, and we'll see then.